We've got one of the most controversial potential top 10 picks in the 2025 NHL Draft. The prospect spotlight is on Anton Frondell for today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalikesh, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down Anton Frondell's game in detail in the scouting report. We'll talk about the skill set in the first segment, skating, shooting, handling, all that good stuff to start the episode off, as well as a profile overall with Frondell. In the second segment, we'll focus on the more in-depth stuff. So the habits, the toolkit, the processing, decision-making, all that stuff. And then in the final segment, we'll look at the overall projection with Frondell. So where he ends up on draft day, what type of player we're talking about at the NHL level, floor, ceiling, comps, and lastly, which team would be the best fit. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode, and if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So just to start here with Frondell, talk me through the size, handedness, what type of style he plays right now, where he's been playing, all that good stuff to get us started.
Yeah, so Anton Frondell is a 6-foot, 196-pound left shot center who's been playing in Sweden this year, splitting his time between the J20 National as well as Hockey Allsvenskan with Djurgården. So he started the season off in J20, also missed some time with injury earlier on in the year, but at least in the most recent stretch since coming back from the World Junior A Championship in December, he's only been playing at the Hockey Allsvenskan level, averaging about 13 minutes a game and having a couple games over 16 minutes as well, playing on the top line and getting some top power play minutes as well. So he's getting more opportunities at the pro level, and this is a two-way physical goal-scoring center. Very good defensive habits, very positionally sound in his own zone, very supportive down low to his defensemen, but at a big cost that we're going to really delve into in today's episode. But overall, defensively, a very positive impact. Also, how he's able to use really clever stick work in combination with his frankly high-end physicality, and that's something that serves him very well offensively as well in terms of getting to goal-scoring positions. But the shot is something special that we're going to be talking about today. But there's definitely a lot of questions about the transition impact with this player, but especially coming back from injury. It took him a while to get going this season, but he's starting to play some better hockey at the Hockey Allsvenskan level at this point. And wanted to ask you, of course, we're going to be talking about the actual physical tools in this first segment, but what has stood out to you in the last 6 months of this player's development, first and foremost?
I think there's some very, very slight strides of development. I don't think there's any regression. You know, if you look at the rankings, obviously here at Elite Prospects, we're by far the lowest on Frondell. We have him in 18th overall, when the consensus is pretty much bona fide top 10. I mean, I only see one other board that has him outside of the top 10. That's Daily Faceoff will have him at 11th, right? So I don't think the main issue has been regression. I think the main issue has been a complete lack of transition involvement. Like, this guy does not get involved in transition. A lot of his plays on puck, heading out of his zone, or either passing it really early to his wingers, or dumping it into central ice. I think those are the main ways that he tries to make plays in transition, and that's been the main issue. There's others around that we'll get into in a second, but I do want to focus on the tools first and foremost. First, the skating. What's your read on the skating? Because he doesn't use it all that much, but when he does, it's not the worst in the world, right?
He can play with real bursts of speed, but the acceleration is a massive problem at this point. I mean, this is a very heavy player at the moment. He's basically 200 pounds at 6 feet. He has the frame and build of an NHL player already easily. He has the physical attributes and strength and power with his frame that'll make the NHL transition a lot easier from that physical perspective. But it does make him very heavy, and it makes that lack of lower body power and explosiveness be even more clear, because as we said about talking with the defensive impact, he drops really, really low to support, and it makes it very difficult for him to catch back up to play going the other way. He's routinely the last player of his forward line to enter the offensive zone, regularly by 2, 3, even 4 seconds, being way behind in terms of not really being an option to support if his wingers are trying to go for a quick break, and just being kind of lost behind play as a result of that. So the skating is mechanically relatively okay, but that lack of explosiveness has resulted in a lot of problems in this game this season that are down to the skating. But also there is going to be a lot of room to improve this moving forward as he gains a bit more lower body strength. I think that his conditioning, his training regimen from whichever team drafts him should be very much focused on. You don't really have to build out the upper body any more than it's at right now. It's already one of the more powerful ones in this draft class. But that lower body, maybe even getting the total weight down a little bit at first to make it easier to move around with explosiveness, that's going to be really key. And even though the skating is a 5 grade for us at Elite Prospects, so average projection, it has been harming his game this season in clear ways. But the best tool he has to be the shot, right? It's a blistering release. So talk me through that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, just so much power behind his release, and it comes back to the upper body strength because the mechanics are just okay. Like they're good for sure. They're not Cole Caulfield level of refined. They don't have that Connor Bedard like legitimate mechanical pop to it. It's just the torque he's able to put on that shot is absolutely ridiculous. You can blast pucks through goalies, and you can still pick corners fairly well. He's got a 7 grade shot at Elite Prospects. We're really high on his ability to get that release working at an NHL level because of the power. You know, there are some good shooters at junior levels who can pick corners really efficiently, who can get the puck off quickly inside of their feet. But they don't manage to score as many goals at the NHL level. We saw that adaptation with Cole Caulfield in his kind of sophomore, junior year in the NHL, where he wasn't scoring as many goals, mainly because those corner picking moments weren't really as readily available. But, you know, this year he's been working a lot on power, on efficiency of release, on disguising his release. That's become a lot more of the way that he's able to score now. And now we're seeing him explode for goals in Montreal. I think the opposite scenario applies in Frondell's case. I think he's going to have no problem scoring goals at an NHL level off rip. I think the issue is going to be able to score them with consistency once goalies learn to read a shot. But regardless, the release as it stands right now is absolutely phenomenal. The playmaking is decent, but not overwhelming. Again, it comes down to transition involvement. He's not really good at getting involved in transition at all right now. He's behind the play very often. But in the offensive zone, you see some flashes of really interesting reads. Cross-ice passes, backdoor passes, slips and hooks to trailers. All those little details you look for playmaking are definitely there. So at Elite Prospects, we have his skating grade, his passing grade as being a 5.5. And our crossover scout, Daniel G., who did a lot of the crossover work on this prospect, put him down as a 5. So average to above average passing skill. Same goes for the handling, slightly above average, based on NHL standards, but nothing really major on that side. Again, because of the lack of kind of pure agility, pure dynamism in Frondell's game. He's a lot more of an open ice kind of from a glide handler, which limits his range on that side. But the physical tools, like we mentioned, this guy's a tank. And that kind of concerns me at the same time because you mentioned adding lower body strength, kind of modulating the weight a little bit, kind of working on the physique. I'm not sure how much work is going to be available for Frondell because he was a very early bloomer. He reached this kind of frame very early.
Yeah.
So my issue with that is kind of how much more room does he have to kind of modify his body at all? I feel like he's already kind of grown out. He looks like a man out there. Like he's a big body, right?
He absolutely is. And I think that really focusing on things to help even just his agility, I think would be really helpful. And his ability to retain momentum through turns, to be able to redirect his speed rather than just focusing on generating from a standstill would be also a really good compensatory thing to focus on in his development. But again, as you mentioned, this is a guy that has a very mature frame. I think last year's draft only had one player with this mature of a frame. frame, and that was Sam Dickinson.
Mhm.
But also with similarly still aspects to work out beyond just the physical components before making the leap to the NHL game. But yeah, I think Frondell is a player with some really standout tools. I think that the handling as well is a real area of strength, especially in tight. He's really versatile and also being able to combine his handling and his goal scoring ability, being quite deceptive with his moment of release and being able to hold on to pucks and layer in delays quite comfortably and fluidly in tight. So a lot of aspects of a goal scoring NHL player. But in the next segment, we're going to be talking a bit more about the mental components of the game that support those tools and what that means for his ability to play center, play in the top six, and that and much more. But first, a quick message from our sponsors.
If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to get them. Game Time is safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they're absolutely obsessed with saving you money. They've got deals at every step of the way, flash deals, zone deals, last minute deals, and the Game Time guarantee as well to make sure you always get the best price for your tickets. And now with all-in pricing, which you can toggle in the app, you can see exactly what you're paying for after fees, after taxes for your tickets. That way you can make the best decision for your wallet. And Game Time isn't just for sports, comedy, theater, whatever requires a ticket, you can find over at Game Time up until the minute the event starts, and sometimes an hour after it starts. You can still get tickets over at Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, let's talk about the details with Anton Frondell. And there's a couple of interesting things to talk about here. Primarily, we already kind of alluded to it in the first segment. The transition issues are certainly an issue regarding pace, regarding speed. So the way his skating combines with his processing, there's a bit of a disconnect there, I feel, because the processing isn't half bad. Depending on who you ask at elite prospects, some of us have him as an above average thinker, some of us have him as an average thinker. Where do you stand on that kind of toggle, though, with Anton Frondell here?
It's a bit of both. I think in my eyes, he'd be a 5.5 grade thinker, so slightly above NHL average projection. And that has mainly to do with his defensive instincts and defensive habits. Really effective scanner down low, drops into the right areas to both use his stick and his big body to disrupt things without necessarily putting himself in a screening position with his goaltender. He's quite aware in terms of also how his position affects his teammates, not just his opposition. And I think that there's a lot of refinement in that aspect of the game and how he thinks it and sees the ice.
Yeah.
But offensively, it's a bit different. I think that he has struggled finding soft spaces or stopping in them. He can pass through them instead in the offensive zone, taking himself out of potentially dangerous scoring positions. I think he has a tendency to just drift to the same areas always in the offensive zone. Like he likes to be a one-timer option from the right circle. He can drift into that area even if there's a lot of coverage there and there are gaps in coverage in other areas in the offensive zone, whereas scanning doesn't perhaps support him as well offensively as it does defensively. So definitely a bit of both sides there with the thinking, and I think it is quite separated between those defensive and offensive responsibilities, because I think that the thinking is also quite good defensively as a forechecker, for instance, and using his stick to disrupt things and to try to force a defender one way and cutting him off there. And I think that translates to a slight above average thinking projection, but there's still definite holes in how he sees the ice offensively. And I also think that one element that is mental related is pace and proactivity, especially offensively, not necessarily only in transition, though very certainly in transition, in off the cycle as well. He can kind of just sit back and be a bit of a passenger, try to wait for his teammates to pull at the defensive structure to create space around him before getting him the puck, rather than being the one to do that and to just like try to pull at defenders, make them make uncomfortable decisions in finding the gaps between their different coverages. And I don't see Frondell forcing defenders into uncomfortable situations nearly often enough, both at the junior and the pro level this season. So I think it's definitely a mixed bag on the thinking aspect. But what's your thoughts on how he thinks the game, and where do you think he'll project as an NHL thinker?
Yeah, so when I think of, these lower pace guys, what I'm really looking for is high end sense in order to be able to compensate for that. We just talked about that with Caleb Denoyer. His processing, his ability to read the game, to play the game within the game, play the meta game, if you will, is high end. It's one of the best in the draft class, and that's why I'm much higher on Caleb Denoyer than I am on Anton Frondell. Is that I don't see that element of being able to play the game within the game, to play chess, to draw pressure in with the puck, and kind of play through it. He's mainly a run and gun, pass the puck off, find soft ice in the offensive zone and shoot type of guy, which that requires hockey sense. And we're talking obviously about the offensive side. You've already covered the defensive side. I fully agree with you. He's a high end defensive player. Um, but I see the hockey sense is slightly above average, sort of you, sort of like you do. But I have a bit more concerns with the way that he approaches the offensive game on puck. And when you look at someone who doesn't create that many advantages with their speed, with their agility, with their dynamism, you're really looking for a guy who's going to be able to, when they have the puck, create that way. Obviously, 95% of the game is played off puck for an individual player, so that definitely matters. His ability to find soft ice in the offensive zone definitely matters. But that 5% of time where you have the puck, it's really important to be able to do something with it, especially at the NHL level where it's quick plays, quick one-touch passes, moving into space, give and goes, attacking the slot, retrieving pucks. I don't see that in his skill set, and that makes me really worried. Um, and I think scouts as well across the NHL side. I mean, our colleague Cam at Elite Prospects, Cam Robinson, is pretty well connected, and he's been asking teams here and there to kind of get their read on what they think. And it's funny, but there seems to be a real disconnect between the rest of the public sphere and the private sphere. I don't think teams are as high on Frondell as Craig Button and Chris Peters and Bob McKenzie kind of make it look like. Right, that's really interesting to me. But overall, yeah, my kind of read on a sense is it's just slightly above average, but I don't think it's nearly enough to compensate for the lack of pace in this game. Whereas on the other side, if you look at the toolkit, the shot combines incredibly well with the off puck movement, right?
Absolutely, and with the physicality as well. He's a player that can force himself into goal scoring positions, push defenders out of the way in order to create those pockets of space, and he gets that release off so quickly, and including in motion. Like, he's a very comfortable shooter in so many different situations. I've seen him just like wallop one timers top corner while skating backwards off the rush. I've seen him also just get a really heavy short side release by deking inside and really using his handling ability as well, which I think is perhaps the most overlooked component of his offensive toolkit at this stage. I think there's a lot to work with there, especially with how it interacts with the goal scoring and the physical play. But I think, as you mentioned, that lack of dynamism, yeah, he's not a very creative player. So even though the handling is really good as a problem solving tool, the application of it to create more complex scoring situations hasn't been there this season. And the playmaking game as well, in terms of layering passing into that, he's a very predictable shooter at this point in his career, and will really need to diversify that offensive threat and output, I think, in order to also just project as a high-end goal scorer in the NHL, because I don't think, as good as the shot is, I don't think that the goal scoring as a whole projects as like a Patrick Laine kind of tool that you can build an entire cohesive NHL game around without necessarily having all the compensatory tools and habits that many NHLers need to really forge a role in the middle or top six.
Yeah, I also think the fact that he developed early, physically, has kind of limited its ability to kind of get some runway, mainly due to the fact that he's mainly bullying guys physically. I don't like I see some mechanics. I don't see that many mechanics. It's a bit concerning, and I'm always concerned with these guys. We saw it with Jesse Puljujärvi, we saw it with Capo Caco, we saw it with Alexis Lafrenière, even to a certain extent at the start of his career, and even now to an extent. Like developing early and having a physical frame early in your career can sometimes hold you back because you're relying on unreliable habits physically in order to win battles. I don't think that'll be as much of a concern with Frondell because he's still kind of dropping his body, is still kind of getting low, getting under opponents' hands, kind of lowering his center of gravity. That's something he can work with. But it just the adaptation to North American hockey might be a bit weird for him because he's going to go from being able to just outmuscle anyone to being to facing off against defenders that are really strong and will be able to push him off puck. So that's kind of the concern on that side. But we'll see how that goes. But now we'll head into the in just a second. We'll head into the final segment here where we talk about the projection with Frondell, where he ends up in the NHL. Let's take a quick break and you just hear from our sponsors before we get into that. Alrighty, so closing off here with the projection segment for Anton Frondell. Let's start with the overall projection on draft day. I mean, if you look at the current draft boards over on his elite prospects page, he's as high as second overall on Craig Button's board and Chris Peters' board. And as we mentioned at the start of the episode, we're pretty much the lowest on him at elite prospects, with him at 18th overall on our on our recent January board. So there's a lot of variability in terms of where people think he's going to end up. And even given what we've heard from scouts so far, I'm not sure even scouts are really kind of sure where he's going to end up on draft day. So I think his range is going to be pretty large in this segment, right? Like he could go anywhere from third to 23rd, I think.
I don't think he'll be falling past like the lottery picks. I think that maybe 4 to 16, a bit of like an extended version of the range that I gave Caleb Desnoyers in yesterday's episode. I think he could both go higher than Caleb and also significantly lower. So I would say maybe like 4 to 15. But you never know with the NHL draft, right? Like maybe he goes second overall. Depends who picks there. It's entirely possible. And I maybe 20th in a like stretched possibility, but I think the frame and the long-term hype here is going to be more than enough to get like a team that lost in the first
Yeah.
playoff round to take that swing on him.
Yeah, I remember one particular scout talking about tournament scouts, maybe potentially really liking this guy. Well, tournament scouts being guys who mainly watch international tournaments to assess players. Anton Frondell had a really good showing a year and a half ago at the U18 showcase. And since then, it's been pretty much like not a lot to work with. And our scout Jimmy Hamrin, our Swedish scout elite prospects, has pretty much watched every single Frondell game to see if maybe we missed something. But it's pretty consistently the same thing. Struggling to get involved in transition, mainly working off puck in the offensive zone, delegating a lot of things to his teammates offensively, and being pretty good defensively. There are some limitations to Frondell's game. I think NHL teams, at least some NHL teams, will see that. Others will be very, very high on him because of the frame and shot. We'll see how it goes, but I think his range is really, really wide. And in terms of projection at the NHL level, though, I think a lot of people are on the same page. It's just a matter of how much you value it. Like, I think we can both agree that the floor with Frondell is he's going to be an NHLer. The worst case scenario is he's a fourth line goal scoring center.
Yeah.
And the most likely outcome is he's a middle six center, either a decent second liner or a very, very, very good third liner who's going to be chipping in on the top power play, who's going to be scoring goals,
Yeah.
and is going to be playing an honest, hard nosed checking game. I think we can both agree on that, right?
Absolutely, we can, and I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in that profile as well on draft. I mean, this is a profile that NHL teams are looking for at the deadline every single year if they're contending, and he's the kind of guy that I think teams would love to just add into the fold. And in terms of player comparisons, we mainly went stylistic here, and I think listing off the names in a vacuum would sound like we think that Frondell's upside is higher than we do actually think it is. But in terms of some stylistic comparisons in recent draft years, the one player that rings a bell for the two of us is Dalibor Dvorsky, but
Yeah.
with significantly less pace for Anton Frondell, and the transition ability is also significantly weaker. But in terms of that defensive responsibility, goal scoring threat, limited dynamic ability, but physically mature and has been on a big stage internationally for like at least 2 or 3 years going into the draft year season. I
Yeah.
think these two players have some similarities.
I think that's the easiest comp. You take Dvorsky, give him a bit less skating, a bit more of a mature frame at the same age. and you get Anton Frondell. They're very, very similar. And Dvorsky went 10th overall in this draft here, so that gives you an idea of where NHL teams are likely to stand on him. And it's the same scenario. Dvorsky struggled massively in his draft year in the Allsvenskan. Didn't have really good showings in the Allsvenskan after dominating at every international stage pretty much, just racking up points at junior levels as well in Slovakia. So it's a very similar situation to where Frondell is right now. He's an internationally dominant player who's struggling right now in the Allsvenskan, who hasn't really been performing up to level in his draft year. I'm sure we're going to see Frondell see a similar kind of drop. Dvorsky was being talked about as a top 3 pick at some point.
Yeah.
I remember Grant McCagg talking about how the Habs should pick him up at 5th overall and all that stuff. It ended up not working out that way. But we'll see. We'll see with Frondell. I think in terms of stylistic comps, in terms of NHL players, again, just stylistic, I don't think he reaches that upside. But John Tavares is probably the easiest NHL comp.
Late career John Tavares.
Late career John Tavares. His current version, as he is right now with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Not a good skater, but really efficient defensively. A good goal scorer. He gets to hard areas off puck. He's able to move off puck and find space. Win his fair share of puck battles. Get the puck off the boards. Pretty crafty and tight. I think that fits fairly well. And Bo Horvat is another one. In terms of the more, I'd say, defensive projection for Anton Frondell. If he's developed into a defensive center, you could see something like a Bo Horvat, but to a lesser extent. Brock Nelson is a good one as well, as a kind of a lower end skater who can still score, and he's pretty involved defensively. I think those 3 are pretty easy comps on that side. But to close things off, we have 4 teams you wanted to talk about decent fits. The first one just being, they usually go for this type of guy.
We just listed 2 players that currently play on their team as stylistic comps. The New York Islanders are a pretty good fit here.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that, especially with Nelson getting up there in age, I'd say that, they're probably looking for someone who can fit seamlessly into that role. I think the Islanders are a decent bet to take a swing at Frondell if he's available where they're picking. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins would be interested in him as well because of their interest in Rutger McGorty, who's also kind of a lower pace, lower skating, but really good goal scoring, really intelligent center. I think that Frondell fits that bill as well. But we also really push for the Buffalo Sabres on this list. Talk me through why that is.
Yeah, I did. I think mainly because in previous seasons, the Buffalo Sabres have been drafting highly intelligent but undersized centers, especially with how their approach is to the game. I think physically, perhaps they're only like 1 inch shorter than Frondell, but ones that are very physically slight. The guys like Consta Helenius and Matthew Savoy, who's in Edmonton at this point, Noah Östlund. Frondell will bring a very different kind of element to that fold down the middle while still being responsible defensively, still having that intelligence to work with, which Buffalo clearly values. He's just a different type of frame while also bringing that goal scoring upside, which they just don't really quite have down the middle apart from like Tage Thompson, right? Like their goal scorers are really coming from the wing, and they've drafted a lot of like intelligent playmakers recently. So Frondell will be a bit of a foil to that. But another team that could be a fit is one that just routinely love this style of player. I mean, they went and picked Dalibor Dvorsky just 2 years ago. The St. Louis Blues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He's right in their wheelhouse. And I think that, they already have Dvorsky in their pool, but I also think that, this is the type of player they target. I mean, even picks like Jimmy Snuggerud and guys like that, they're able to go, they have a decent variety in terms of pace. I think they'll want to kind of target Dvorsky. They already did. I think they're going to want to target Anton Frondell due to the goal scoring upside and the physical play that he brings to the game. And we'll see where that goes for them. I mean, the St. Louis Blues are kind of in no man's land right now, kind of on the cusp of being a lottery team, on the cusp of being a contender, kind of in the middle, and they've been there for a while since their deep playoff run a couple years ago. It's kind of been, where we headed. So I think that they're going to want to target upside, and I'll be the first to concede. Frondell has considerable upside if he can work on that skating. It's just the problem is we don't really think it'll be possible given his frame. So worst case scenario, they have a middle 6 center. And if they trust in their development team, if they trust that their team's going to be able to work on his skating, get him on his outside edges, but get him able to kind of power through his stride, extend his stride when needed, maybe we're talking about a complimentary top line scorer. And if that's the case, if they get that in the 10 to 15 range, I mean, my goodness, that's great value. So we'll see where that goes. But that's our episode done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For a second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. For a second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. We have Flip and Steele giving you the best advice that you can get for your fantasy hockey team. And remember to check in for the rest of our shows as we finalize our January month. And on January 31st, it's going to be my last episode for Locked On NHL Prospects. So make sure to tune in when we give you a good show at that point. This has been Hattie Kalakash, so Sebastian Hi. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you tune in next time.